Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the idea of them hurting you felt almost funny, like, ha ha ha, life would never twist that way, right? I used to think the same, sitting on my quiet porch in the evenings, remembering how this house was once full of noise, toys scattered on the floor, my son running through the hallway with scraped knees and wild stories from school. All those days felt endless back then. And if someone had told me that years later the same boy would send me a cold message asking me to clear my things out like I was just extra storage, I would have laughed and said, not my son, never. But life has a strange sense of humor. And before I go further, let me tell you why this story matters, why the title you clicked and those shocking thumbnail words are not exaggerated at all. My son really did text me, telling me to take my old stuff out of the garage because they needed space for a new car. And yes, I really took everything quietly, without argument, without drama, but what he didn't know, what nobody bothered to check, was that those dusty boxes he wanted gone carried documents that proved the house he proudly called his was still legally mine. But to understand how things reached that point, you have to go back with me a little. This house wasn't just property. My late wife and I bought it over 30 years ago when prices were low and dreams were big. We painted every wall ourselves, saved money for months to buy decent furniture, and slowly built a home where our son grew up safe and loved. I still remember teaching him how to ride his bicycle in front of this house, running behind him out of breath while he shouted, "Don't let go, Dad." And when I finally did, he rode on his own without realizing it, laughing like he'd conquered the world. Those memories, they stick to the walls. After my wife passed away, the silence inside the house grew heavy. Every room reminded me of her laughter, her cooking, her humming while watering plants. Some nights I'd sit alone in the kitchen, weeping quietly, wondering how life moved so fast. Around that time, my son had just gotten married. He and his wife struggled with rent, job pressure, city expenses. And what kind of father watches his child struggle when he has something he can offer? So I made what I thought was a loving decision. I transferred the house ownership to my son. My thinking was simple. They could live comfortably and I would stay with them. Big happy family, right? Ha ha ha. Sometimes innocence feels foolish later. At first, everything was warm. My daughter-in-law called me dad. My son thanked me often. We ate dinners together. I helped fix things around the house, but slowly small things began to change. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Plans were made without including me. Renovation talks started, modern kitchen, new design, more space. I ignored the discomfort, telling myself young people just live differently. Then my things slowly began disappearing from shared spaces. My chair in the living room moved aside, my storage boxes shifted to the garage, and I kept telling myself, don't overthink it, they're young, give them room. Until one Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my own son. No call, no hello, just, Dad, you need to take your old stuff out of the garage this weekend. We're buying a new car and need the space. That was it, no please, no discussion. I stared at the screen for minutes, reading the message again and again, feeling something heavy settle in my chest. Old stuff, that's what my memories had become. I called him, trying to keep my voice steady, but he sounded busy, distracted, like this was a minor task, not something that hurt. Just come this weekend and take the boxes, he said before hanging up. That Saturday, I drove to the house that used to feel like my world, and somehow, I felt like a visitor. My daughter-in-law barely looked at me. My son helped carry boxes, tossing them carelessly into my car trunk. One box fell hard, and I almost shouted because inside were photo albums, documents, pieces of our life. But he laughed and said, "Relax, Dad, it's just old papers." Just old papers, sigh, if only he knew. I drove away feeling smaller than I ever had, watching them stand comfortably in the doorway of the house I built, relieved to have more space without me. That night in my small rental apartment, surrounded by dusty boxes and silence, I began unpacking slowly, tears falling without warning. Until my hand froze on one folder I hadn't seen in years, and what I discovered inside those forgotten documents made me sit upright at 3 a.m, heart racing, realizing my son had made the biggest mistake of his life, because those old papers changed everything, and what I decided to do next would shock him in ways he never imagined, and trust me, what came after was only the beginning. I barely slept that night, sitting on the floor among half-open boxes, the apartment quiet except for the ticking clock and my own shaky breathing, because what I'd just found didn't feel real at first, like maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on me. You see, when I had transferred the house to my son, my lawyer had insisted on adding one condition, a small clause I barely paid attention to back then, because, honestly, why would I need legal protection from my own child? Ha ha ha, funny how life teaches lessons. The document clearly stated that even though ownership moved to my son, I had the legal right to live in that house for the rest of my life. Lifetime residence rights. I read the sentence again and again, my tears slowly drying as confusion turned into clarity. They hadn't just moved my things, they had pushed me out of a house I still had legal rights to live in. And suddenly, the way my son rushed me, the way they avoided conversations, the way they slowly shifted my presence out of daily life, it didn't feel accidental anymore. It felt planned. That realization hurt worse than anything else. Betrayal doesn't come loudly, it creeps in quietly. I sat there whispering to myself, no, no, he wouldn't plan this, but deep inside, something knew better. Morning sunlight crept through my small apartment window and reality hit me hard. My rent alone ate up most of my monthly income. Utilities, medicines, groceries, everything suddenly felt heavier. Meanwhile, my son and his wife were living comfortably in a fully paid house, my house, while I was counting every expense. I opened my laptop and started searching, slowly typing questions about conditional property transfers, legal rights, elder property laws. Hours passed as I read article after article, scribbling notes like a student preparing for exams. And every page confirmed the same thing: the law was on my side. They had violated the agreement. They could not legally force me out, but knowing the truth and acting on it are two very different things. My hands trembled as I held the documents. Could I really take legal action against my own son, the boy whose fevers I stayed up all night treating, whose school fees I struggled to pay, whose heartbreaks I comforted? Being a parent doesn't come with instructions on what to do when your own child becomes the source of your pain. Around noon, my son called casually, asking if I'd settled into the apartment okay. His voice sounded light, almost relieved. I forced a weak laugh and told him everything was fine, that I'd manage, and in that moment, something inside me decided to stay quiet, not out of fear but strategy. They believed the problem was solved. They thought the old man had quietly stepped aside, and maybe for the first time in my life, I chose not to react emotionally. I chose to think. That afternoon, I called my old lawyer's office, half expecting they wouldn't remember me. But when the receptionist transferred my call and I heard his familiar calm voice, something inside me steadied. I explained everything, my voice cracking halfway through. He listened silently, then said something that stayed with me. You trusted your family, that's not a crime, but protecting yourself now isn't betrayal either. He asked me to bring all documents to his office in 2 days. When the call ended, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: control, not revenge, just control over my own life again. But things weren't that simple. That evening, while unpacking more boxes, I noticed other things missing. Jewelry that belonged to my late wife, a silver tea set gifted by my mother, photo albums, items I clearly remembered packing. My stomach twisted. Had they thrown them away or, worse, kept them? I made a list, writing everything I could remember, each item bringing back memories that made my chest ache. And slowly, sadness started turning into anger. Not loud anger, cold anger, the kind that makes decisions quietly. That night, I wrote down every moment that led to this situation: conversations, messages, dates. If this was going to become a legal battle, I needed proof, and proof begins with memory. Days passed slowly. I avoided calls, pretending to adjust to my new place while my mind prepared for what was coming. I even accepted an invitation for dinner at their place the following weekend. Yes, I went. And sitting at that table, watching them casually talk about buying new furniture, redesigning rooms, enjoying their new space, something became crystal clear. They weren't sorry, they were comfortable without me. And sometimes, clarity hurts more than arguments. When I returned to my apartment that night, I opened the folder again, touched the document, and whispered, "You should have checked the boxes, son." Because what I was about to do next would change everything between us forever. And trust me, when the legal notice finally reached his hands, the shock in his voice was something I'll never forget. But what happened after that, nobody saw coming. The weekend dinner at my son's place kept replaying in my head for days, like a movie scene stuck on repeat, and every time I remembered how normal they acted, how comfortably they talked about their future while I sat there feeling like a guest in the home I built, my chest tightened all over again. You'd think there would have been guilt, some hesitation, maybe even a small apology for rushing me out, but no. They talked about their new car arriving soon, about turning the spare room into a home office, about finally having their own space. Their own space, sigh. I smiled politely, nodded, even laughed once or twice, but inside something had quietly shifted. That dinner wasn't reconciliation, it was confirmation. Confirmation that they had already moved on without me. And the worst part, my son didn't even realize how much he'd changed. He asked about my apartment like someone asking about a hotel stay. "You settling in okay, Dad?" he said while scrolling through his phone. Not once did he ask if I was happy. Not once did he ask if I wanted to come back. And I think that's when acceptance finally hit me. Sometimes people don't become cruel overnight, they just slowly stop seeing your value. A couple of days later, I sat in my lawyer's office again, documents neatly stacked in front of us. He read through everything carefully, nodding as if the situation was unfortunately familiar. After a long pause, he looked at me and said, "Legally speaking, this is straightforward. You have lifetime residence rights. They cannot remove you. What they did violates the agreement." Hearing it said so plainly made my stomach twist. Straightforward in law, complicated in life. He then explained my options. We could send a legal notice demanding they honor the agreement and allow me to return home. If they refused, we could take the matter to court and potentially even reverse the ownership transfer entirely. That last part shocked me. Take the house back, the idea felt heavy. Not because I didn't want justice, but because this wasn't a stranger I'd fight. This was my own child. My lawyer noticed my hesitation. You don't have to decide today, he said gently, but deep down I already knew. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about dignity, respect, boundaries, and if I let this slide, what message would that send? That parents can be pushed aside once they're no longer convenient. I signed the paperwork for the legal notice with a trembling hand, paying the retainer fee from savings I'd carefully built over decades. Walking out of that office, the city felt different. Like a storm was coming, but at least this time I wasn't helpless. That night my son called again, casually reminding me about the dinner invitation for next Sunday. I answered softly, pretending everything was fine. Maybe part of me wanted one last normal interaction before things exploded, or maybe I just wanted to see if he'd realize what was happening before it was too late. Sunday arrived quickly. I baked his favorite pie just like old times and drove over. The house looked different. Fresh paint, new decorations, furniture rearranged. My wife's old curtains were gone, family photos replaced with abstract artwork. It felt like walking through a stranger's memory. During dinner, my daughter-in-law excitedly described how perfect the garage space now was for their incoming car. My son joked about how cramped it had been earlier with all those boxes. I forced a smile, but inside my chest burned. Those boxes held my memories, my life, my rights, and he laughed about them like clutter. Halfway through dinner, I noticed them exchanging worried looks. They seemed tense, distracted. Something was bothering them. And suddenly my son asked carefully, "Dad, you're not upset about moving out, right?" There it was, fear, maybe guilt, maybe instinct telling him something wasn't right. I smiled gently and said, "No, son, you need your space." I understand. The relief on his face was instant, and in that moment I almost felt sorry for what was coming, because less than 24 hours later, the legal notice would arrive at his doorstep. Monday morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my lawyer. Notice delivered. Confirmation received. My heart pounded. I imagined the mail carrier handing over the envelope, my son opening it casually, then reading again. And right on cue, my phone rang. His name flashed on the screen. I answered calmly. "Dad, what is this?" His voice was sharp, panicked. I took a slow breath. "It's a legal notice. You violated the agreement. I have the right to live in that house." Silence followed, then chaos, my daughter-in-law shouting in the background, my son accusing me of overreacting, saying I'd given them the house, saying families don't do this to each other. Funny how family matters only when it benefits someone. Calls kept coming, text messages filled my phone, some pleading, some angry, some threatening. I didn't reply. My lawyer had been clear, all communication now went through him. That evening my apartment buzzer rang unexpectedly. Through the small camera screen, I saw them standing outside, my son and his wife. She looked like she'd been crying. He looked furious. They kept pressing the buzzer, calling my phone, begging to talk. My hands shook, but I didn't open the door. Instead, I called my lawyer, who calmly told me to stay inside while he contacted local authorities. Within minutes, officers arrived and asked them to leave. Hearing my son argue in the hallway, hearing strangers treat him like a disturbance outside my home, broke something inside me. But also, strangely, it made me stronger. Because now the truth was clear, there was no quiet solution left, and what they would try next to stop me would show just how far they were willing to go, and trust me, the tactics they used next shocked even me. The hallway finally went quiet that night after the officers asked them to leave, but the silence that followed inside my apartment felt heavier than the shouting that came before. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands still shaking, staring at the door like they might come back any second. Never in my life had I imagined things would reach this point, police telling my own son to leave his father alone. All parenting manuals never cover moments like this. For hours I replayed the scene in my mind, Jessica crying, my son angry, both of them shocked that I didn't simply open the door and surrender again. But something inside me had hardened, not with hate but with clarity. When someone shows you who they are, you have to believe them, and if you're watching this thinking, could I ever stand up to my own family like that? Well, trust me, I ask myself the same thing every minute. Because loving someone doesn't mean accepting disrespect forever. And right when I thought things might calm down after that confrontation, they found a new way to come at me the next afternoon. My phone rang from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A cold, polished voice introduced herself as my daughter-in-law's mother. I'd met her only a couple of times, always polite on the surface but with that subtle tone that made you feel smaller somehow. She began sweetly, saying she was calling out of concern that the whole situation was getting out of hand. Then slowly her words turned sharper. She said I was destroying my son's happiness over a misunderstanding. That elderly people sometimes get confused or emotional when they feel left out. And then came the real insult, hidden behind polite words. She suggested maybe I wasn't thinking clearly anymore, that maybe I needed help. I felt heat rise in my chest, not because she hurt my feelings, but because she tried to make me doubt my own sanity. I calmly told her I knew exactly what I was doing and that my lawyer agreed. She scoffed and warned that lawyers manipulate old people for money. That comment made me laugh softly, not a happy laugh, but the kind that comes when you finally see through someone completely. I ended the call without raising my voice. But after hanging up, I realized something important. They weren't going to fight fair, and then the pressure started coming from everywhere. Old neighbors began calling, asking if everything was okay. Mutual friends mentioned vague social media posts about greedy parents and broken families. Apparently, my daughter-in-law had posted about elder manipulation, hinting that I was being controlled by outsiders. My own cousin from another state called, confused, asking why I was suing my son. Suddenly, I was the villain in a story I never told. It stung, not because strangers misunderstood, but because my own family was painting me as unstable just to protect themselves. That night, sitting alone, I almost picked up the phone to call my son and say, "Let's stop this, keep the house." But then I remembered the way my boxes were tossed into my car, the way they smiled in relief as I drove away. And I put the phone back down. A couple of days later, my lawyer called. My son had hired an expensive legal firm. Their lawyer claimed I left voluntarily and that the ownership transfer had no enforceable conditions. Worse, they accused me of taking items from the house that belonged to them. Hearing that made my hands clench. They were turning everything upside down. My lawyer remained calm, explaining that this was expected. When people feel cornered, they attack. He reassured me our evidence was strong. Still, he warned things would get uglier before they got better. And honestly, he was right. That evening, my son sent one final message directly to my phone. I won't repeat all of it, but the message basically said I'd end up alone and miserable while they'd still have the house. Reading it hurt more than any legal threat, not because I believed him, but because it showed how little respect remained. I saved the message as evidence and turned off my phone for 3 days. 3 quiet days, no calls, no emails, no drama. I walked around local markets, read books, tried to remember who I was outside this conflict. Sometimes peace is necessary before battle continues, but peace never lasts long in situations like this. A few days later, a courier delivered an envelope to my apartment. Inside was a cashier's check, $50,000, along with a handwritten letter from my son. Suddenly they wanted peace. They apologized, said they'd been stressed, careless. Offered the money so I could buy a condo and start fresh while they kept the house. My hands trembled holding the letter. $50,000 would solve many problems. No court, no drama, no public embarrassment, just closure. For hours I sat at my kitchen table staring at that check. Part of me wanted to accept, end everything quietly, but then a memory hit me, my late wife's voice telling me once, never let kindness turn into weakness. This wasn't generosity. This was negotiation because they were scared. And deep down I knew something else too. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about principle. I called my lawyer, read him the letter. He told me it was a smart move from their side, cheaper than losing the house in court. He asked me what I wanted, and after a long silence I answered honestly, I wanted my home back. That evening I mailed the check back with a short letter declining their offer, and within hours my phone rang again. My son's voice this time wasn't angry, it was cold. He told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Said I'd lose everything, including him. Maybe he thought fear would change my mind, but something inside me had already crossed a line. And after I hung up, staring at the quiet room around me, I realized the real fight was about to begin, and what happened next would prove just how desperate they'd become to stop me. After I sent that check back, the silence lasted only a few hours, and honestly, those few quiet hours felt strange, like the calm before a storm you know is coming but can't see yet. I sat on my couch, staring at the blank television screen, my mind running through every memory of my son growing up, his first day at school, the way he used to run to me when he was scared of thunderstorms, the time he cried after losing his first soccer match and I told him losing teaches you more than winning. And now here we were, standing on opposite sides of a legal fight over the very house where all those memories were made. Life has a cruel sense of irony sometimes, sigh. Just when I started thinking maybe they'd step back and let things cool down, my phone rang again late that evening from a blocked number. Something told me not to answer, but curiosity won. It was my son, no shouting this time. No panic, just a cold, tired voice. He said I was being selfish, that parents are supposed to sacrifice for their children, not drag them into court. He reminded me how hard life was for them now, how they'd invested money into renovating the house. And then he said something that stuck with me: "You're choosing a building over your own family." For a moment, guilt crawled up inside me. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe this fight wasn't worth losing my son forever. But then another memory surfaced, me driving away from my own house with tears in my eyes while they stood relieved at the door. They chose comfort over me first. I didn't throw anyone out. I simply refused to disappear quietly. I told him calmly that this wasn't about property, it was about respect. He hung up without saying goodbye. The next few days brought something unexpected: loneliness mixed with doubt. Fighting strangers is easy. Fighting your own family drains something deeper. Some nights I sat awake wondering if I'd end up completely alone because of this decision. You know, if you're watching right now and you've ever had to stand up for yourself against people you love, you'll understand how heavy that feels. And honestly, stories like this happen more often than people talk about. Families break quietly behind closed doors. If you're listening and these real-life stories hit home, make sure you subscribe and stay with this channel, because sometimes hearing others' stories gives us strength to face our own. And trust me, this story was far from over around that time. I realized I needed support from people who actually understood what I was going through. Not neighbors gossiping, not relatives choosing sides. Real people with similar experiences. I found a local support group at a community center for seniors dealing with family conflicts and financial abuse. Walking into that room the first time felt awkward. I almost turned around and left, but once people started sharing their stories, my heart sank. One man talked about his daughter taking control of his bank accounts. A woman described being locked out of her own home after signing papers she didn't fully understand. Story after story sounded painfully familiar. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled, but the words came out. And instead of judgment, I saw nods of understanding. One woman squeezed my hand and said, "You're not cruel for protecting yourself, you're brave." I hadn't heard that word in a long time. Brave. Walking out that night, I felt lighter. Not because the problem disappeared, but because I wasn't alone in it anymore. Meanwhile, the legal fight kept moving forward. My lawyer called to inform me that my son's legal team was now questioning my mental competence, claiming I was being manipulated. Hearing that almost made me laugh out loud. After decades of paying bills, raising a child, managing life's struggles, suddenly I was incapable of making decisions. But that tactic hurt too, because it showed how far they were willing to go. Paint the father as confused, unstable, manipulated, anything to win. My lawyer assured me their arguments were weak, but warned again that court battles get messy. Personal details get dragged into public view, and he asked me once more if I was prepared for that. I paused before answering, because preparation isn't about confidence, it's about acceptance, and I told him yes. Because backing out now would mean accepting that what they did was okay, and it wasn't. A couple of weeks later, something surprising happened. My son, his wife, and her mother showed up at my apartment again on a Sunday afternoon. This time they looked different, softer. My daughter-in-law held flowers. My son carried a bakery box with my favorite pastries. Apologies poured out, tears, promises. They said they wanted me back home, that we could fix everything. They'd give me a room, we'd be family again. For a moment my heart almost broke open. Hearing my son say he missed me, every father wants to believe that, but something didn't feel right. The timing was suspicious. I asked them directly what changed. At first they avoided the question. Then my son snapped, admitting their lawyer warned them they might lose the house entirely in court. Suddenly everything made sense. This wasn't reconciliation. It was damage control. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing the house. And right there in the hallway, I realized forgiveness without accountability only invites repeated betrayal. I calmly told them the court would decide what happens next. My daughter-in-law cried harder. My son called me stubborn. And when they finally left, slamming the hallway door, my hands shook again, but this time from resolve, not fear. Because now it was clear, the truth would come out in court. And what happened when we finally stood in front of that judge changed everything none of us expected. The morning of the court hearing arrived faster than I expected, and honestly, I barely slept the night before. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, memories and worries mixing together in my head. Part of me kept thinking, how did it even come to this? A father preparing to face his own son in court over the home they once shared. It sounded unreal. Yet there I was, putting on my old suit, hands slightly shaking as I tied my tie, whispering to myself, just stay calm. The drive downtown felt longer than usual, every traffic light giving my mind another chance to second-guess everything. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about revenge, it was about correcting something wrong. And sometimes, doing the right thing feels terrible before it feels right. The courtroom itself was smaller than I imagined. No dramatic movie atmosphere, just wooden benches, quiet murmurs, and people waiting for their cases to be called. My lawyer sat beside me, flipping through documents calmly, like this was just another workday. Across the room sat my son and his wife with their lawyer. He looked confident, expensive suit, polished smile, the kind of person who probably wins arguments for a living. My son avoided looking at me at first. When our eyes finally met, something strange passed between us. Anger, regret, maybe both. Then the judge entered, everyone stood, and suddenly this family conflict became official, legal. Real their lawyer spoke first, presenting the situation as if I were a confused old man regretting a gift I had willingly given. He described the dispute as a minor misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Listening to him felt surreal, like hearing someone rewrite your life story incorrectly. My lawyer stood next, calmly presenting the conditional deed agreement, the lifetime residence clause, the messages asking me to remove my belongings, the evidence showing I had effectively been pushed out. Piece by piece, the truth unfolded. Still, hearing it all out loud made my chest tighten, because legal language sounds so cold compared to emotional reality. When the judge asked if I had left voluntarily, my answer came out steadier than I expected. No, I felt I had no choice. Then came cross-examination. Their lawyer questioned my memory, my independence, even hinted that loneliness made me emotional and irrational. For a moment, anger flared inside me, but instead of reacting, I simply answered clearly. I told the judge I knew exactly where my documents were, in the boxes they asked me to remove, the same boxes that proved my rights. I heard quiet murmurs behind me. My son shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and suddenly the confident story their lawyer was telling began to crack. When my son took the stand, it hurt more than I expected. Watching him swear to tell the truth while avoiding my gaze felt like losing something all over again. He tried to explain that they needed space, that living together became difficult, that things were misunderstood. But under questioning, small details slipped out. He admitted they expected me to adjust quietly, admitted conversations about renovations and plans never included me. At one point, frustrated, he blurted out that they shouldn't have to live with someone always in the way. The courtroom went silent. And right then, I think everyone understood what had really happened. The judge called for a short break before delivering her decision. Sitting outside the courtroom, my hands finally began to shake, not from fear of losing, but from realizing what winning would mean. Winning meant forcing my own child to leave the house. Winning meant accepting that our relationship might never recover. My lawyer placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, but no legal victory erases emotional cost. When we returned inside, the judge's decision came quickly. The conditional agreement was valid, my residence rights had been violated, ownership transfer could be reversed if I chose, and then she asked me directly what I wanted. For months I'd imagined that moment, dreamed about it. And yet when the words came out, they still felt heavy. I want my house back. Gasps echoed behind me, my son cursed under his breath, his wife began crying, but something inside me remained calm, not happy, just certain. The judge ordered the property to revert to my name and gave them 30 days to vacate. One strike of the gavel and everything changed. Walking out of the courthouse, victory didn't feel like fireworks. It felt quiet, exhausting. Necessary, my phone buzzed nonstop, relatives, neighbors, people who had heard rumors. I ignored most of it. That evening, sitting alone again in my small apartment, the reality sank in. I had won legally, but emotionally the damage remained, and yet strangely I also felt lighter. For the first time in months, the situation was no longer uncertain. The truth was settled, still the story didn't end there. Appeals were filed, angry messages circulated, friends picked sides, my son blamed me publicly, saying I'd destroyed their lives, and part of me wondered if things would get worse before settling down, but the law was clear now. The countdown had begun, they had to leave, and soon I would walk back into the home I built not as a guest but as the rightful owner again. What I didn't know yet was how ugly those final weeks would become, and what I discovered inside the house when I finally returned shocked me more than the court battle itself. The 30 days the court gave them to leave felt strangely long and painfully short at the same time. Every morning I woke up knowing the house was legally mine again, yet I still slept in that small apartment, waiting for the final step. You'd think winning in court would bring instant relief, but real life doesn't work like movies. Victory comes with paperwork, logistics, emotions, and sometimes more drama. My lawyer warned me to be careful, saying people who lose big often try small acts of revenge on their way out. At first, I thought he was exaggerating. After all, this was still my son. But life kept proving I underestimated how bitter things had become. A couple of weeks into that 30-day period, I drove past the house quietly one afternoon, just to see how things looked. Old habits, I guess. As I turned the corner, my stomach dropped. A moving truck stood in the driveway, its back door open, furniture being loaded inside. At first, I told myself they were just moving their own belongings. But then I saw something that froze me. Two movers carried out my old wooden cabinet, the one my wife and I bought during our first year of marriage. That cabinet was part of the house long before my son even thought about owning it. My heart started pounding. I parked down the street, watching helplessly as more familiar items came out. They weren't just moving, they were taking whatever they could. My hands shook as I dialed my lawyer. He answered calmly, but the moment I explained what I saw, his tone changed. Within hours, he secured an emergency court order preventing them from removing property items belonging to the home. Later that evening, a sheriff's deputy delivered the order personally. Apparently, the scene that followed was loud enough for neighbors to step outside. Arguments spilled onto the street. And suddenly, everyone on Maple Street knew exactly what had happened. News travels fast in neighborhoods. The next few days, several old neighbors called or texted me. Some admitted they always felt something was wrong after I moved out. One neighbor even told me my son and his wife had become distant and rude over time, hosting loud parties and ignoring complaints. Hearing that hurt in a different way, I always believed I raised him better, but sometimes parents see their children through memories, not reality. Meanwhile, my son tried one last attempt to contact me. He called late one night, his voice tired, almost defeated. He said they'd invested money into renovating the place, that losing the house would ruin them financially. For a brief moment, guilt tugged at me again. No parent wants to see their child struggle, but consequences don't disappear just because emotions are involved. I reminded him calmly that choices have outcomes. He hung up quietly this time. No shouting, no insults. Just silence, and somehow that silence hurt more. Moving day finally arrived on a cold November morning. I pulled up outside the house with sheriff deputies, a locksmith, and a moving company. Official procedure, legal process. Still, my hands trembled stepping out of the car. My son's truck sat half-loaded in the driveway. His wife sat on the porch steps, eyes swollen from crying. A few neighbors pretended to walk their dogs while watching. Nobody likes public family drama, but curiosity wins. The deputy asked if I wanted to proceed. I nodded. What else was there to do? My son came out of the house, anger written all over his face. He accused me of throwing them onto the street, of choosing property over blood, but I reminded him quietly that I didn't start this. They pushed me out first. Now I was simply taking back what was always mine. Watching them load their final belongings felt surreal. The same driveway where I once taught him how to reverse a car now held strangers carrying boxes of his life away. My movers began bringing my stored furniture back inside, old memories slowly returning to their place. Some neighbors came over, welcoming me back warmly. They said the street felt different after I left. Hearing that almost made me tear up. At exactly noon, the locksmith changed the locks. Just like that, the house was mine again in every sense. Deputies left, movers finished, and by late afternoon, I stood alone in my living room. My living room, dust floated in sunlight through the window. The air smelled different, like strangers had lived there, which they had. Still, something familiar remained. Homes remember people. I walked room to room slowly, touching walls, remembering birthdays, holidays, quiet nights with my wife. In the bedroom closet, I found something unexpected, my wife's jewelry box hidden behind piles of clothes. Every piece still inside. They hadn't sold them, they'd simply hidden them away. That discovery stung more than losing the house ever did. It showed intention, planning, and as I searched further, I found printed emails between my son and his wife discussing how to move me out gradually after ownership transfer. It wasn't a misunderstanding, it was strategy. That evening, I called my lawyer just to say, "I'm home." He congratulated me, but after the call ended, I sat quietly on my bed, staring around the room. Winning felt different than I imagined, not joyful, just peaceful, like finally setting down a heavy weight. Later, a friend from the support group visited with food, and we ate in the kitchen where my wife once laughed while baking cookies. She asked if I regretted anything. I thought for a long time before answering. The truth was painful but clear. I didn't lose my son during the lawsuit. I lost him long before, I just didn't realize it then. And as night settled over the house, one thought stayed in my mind. The battle was over, but rebuilding life afterward, that was just beginning. And what happened months later, when my son's world finally collapsed, surprised even me. The first few weeks back in the house felt strange, almost like moving into a familiar place that somehow wasn't fully mine yet. Every room carried memories, but also traces of the time I'd been pushed out. New paint colors, rearranged furniture, little changes that reminded me strangers had lived inside my life. Still, slowly, day by day, the house began feeling like home again. I repainted walls in softer colors, brought family photos back to their places, opened windows to let fresh air push out the stale feeling of conflict. The garden needed work too. Weeds had taken over, but strangely, pulling them out felt therapeutic. like cleaning more than soil, cleaning emotional leftovers. And in those quiet moments, working with my hands under the open sky, I realized something surprising. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired and ready to move forward. Life didn't magically become perfect, of course. Some evenings felt lonely. The silence after years of tension felt almost unfamiliar. But something else began filling that space: new routines, new friendships, new purpose. Patricia from the support group became a regular visitor. Soon, others from the group started coming over too. People who had gone through their own battles with family betrayal, property disputes, financial abuse. We shared meals, stories, sometimes laughter, sometimes tears, a strange new family built not by blood but by understanding. And honestly, I hadn't realized how much I needed that until it happened. Sometimes life removes people to make room for better ones. Around that time, I also began volunteering at a legal aid clinic helping seniors facing situations similar to mine. Sitting across from frightened grandparents who feared losing their homes, holding their hands while explaining their rights gave my experience meaning. My fight wasn't just personal anymore, it helped others stand up too. 7 people, in fact, managed to recover property or finances after hearing my story and seeking help. And every time one of them thanked me, a small part of the pain I carried seemed to fade. Turns out, healing often comes from helping others heal. 6 months passed, and spring arrived, bringing color back into the neighborhood. Cherry blossoms lined the streets again, just like they did when my son was little and used to kick petals around pretending they were snow. One morning, while watering plants, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. It went to voicemail, and when I listened, my heart tightened. It was my son. His voice sounded different, tired, broken almost. He said Derek, his partner through all of this, had left him, blaming him for losing the house and their comfortable life. Apparently, things spiraled after they moved away. Jobs were lost, finances collapsed, arguments grew. Now he was alone, struggling just to pay rent. And then he said the words I'd once waited to hear: "I'm sorry, Dad." Hearing that should have brought relief. Instead, it brought complicated silence. Because apologies after consequences don't erase what happened, I saved the voicemail but didn't call back, not out of cruelty, but clarity. Some wounds need time before conversation becomes possible. Later that week, Harold from our community group asked what I planned to do about the call. I told him honestly, nothing. Because forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. I can forgive someone in my heart to free myself from anger, but that doesn't mean returning to the same situation. My son didn't reach out when he had everything. He reached out when he had nothing left, and maybe that's human. Maybe suffering teaches lessons comfort never can, but trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild overnight. Life continued settling into a new normal. The house slowly filled with warmth again. Weekend dinners with friends, laughter echoing in rooms that once felt empty. I even turned the spare room, the one they once wanted for an office, into a small art studio. Painting became therapy. Landscapes, old memories, simple scenes from the garden. I hadn't touched a brush in years, but creativity returned like an old friend. Funny how parts of ourselves wait patiently until life slows enough to rediscover them. One evening, Patricia asked if I regretted cutting my son out of my will. I'd recently updated it, leaving everything to organizations helping seniors facing abuse instead. At first, her question felt harsh, but then I realized it was fair. After a long pause, I answered honestly. My son already received his inheritance once, the house I gave him freely. He chose greed over gratitude and lost it. Giving him another chance to repeat that mistake wouldn't help either of us. And sometimes, love means letting people face consequences, not protecting them from every fall. By summer, the house truly felt alive again. Garden beds flourished, neighbors stopped by for coffee, laughter replaced tension. And slowly, the fear of ending life alone faded. Because family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who stand beside you when blood walks away. And just when life seemed to finally settle into peace, a letter arrived one afternoon in handwriting I hadn't seen in months. 5 pages long, my son again, asking for forgiveness, asking if he could come home. And as I sat at my kitchen table reading his words, one question echoed in my mind: had he truly changed, or was he simply out of options again? And what I decided after reading that letter surprised even me. The letter sat on my kitchen table for almost an hour before I even opened it. I knew the handwriting immediately, my son's, the same uneven loops I used to see on school permission slips and birthday cards he made as a child. For a moment I just stared at it, fingers resting on the envelope, wondering how life twists so strangely that a father hesitates to read a letter from his own child. Finally, I sighed and opened it, 5 full pages. Apologies, explanations, regret poured across every line. He wrote that he'd been influenced, that stress and money worries clouded his judgment, that losing everything made him realize what truly mattered. He said Derek leaving him opened his eyes, that he now understood how cruel they had been. Then came the part that hit hardest. He asked if he could come home, not just visit, come back. Reading that, my chest tightened. Because part of me still saw the little boy who ran into my arms after nightmares, and another part saw the man who told me I was in the way. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not thrown away, just stored. Some decisions need distance. The next few days were heavy with thought. Everywhere I looked, memories surfaced. Him learning to walk across this living room floor. Him studying late at the kitchen table while I made coffee. Him hugging me after graduation, promising he'd always take care of me one day. Promises sound so pure when life hasn't tested them yet. But reality changes people, or maybe it simply reveals them. Friends at the community center had different opinions. Some said blood is blood and reconciliation matters. Others warned me not to reopen wounds. Patricia told me forgiveness doesn't mean reopening your door to the same pain. Harold said loneliness sometimes disguises itself as forgiveness, and honestly, both arguments made sense. Because the truth is, love doesn't disappear just because trust does. It just becomes complicated. Around that time, news reached me through mutual acquaintances about how badly things had gone for him. After moving away, finances collapsed, legal fees piled up, jobs were lost, stress broke their relationship apart. Derek left, blaming everything on the house dispute. My son apparently struggled to keep up with rent, moving from one small apartment to another. Hearing all this stirred something inside me, not satisfaction, not revenge, just sadness. No parent celebrates their child's suffering, even when consequences are deserved. But at the same time, consequences teach lessons protection never can, and I kept reminding myself I didn't create this situation. Their choices did. One evening, while watering the garden, Harold asked quietly, "Do you think he really changed?" I didn't answer immediately, because how do you measure change? Words are easy. Real change shows through time and actions. I told him honestly, maybe he has, maybe life finally humbled him, but trust isn't repaired by apology letters. It takes years, and deep inside I knew another truth. If he truly understood what he'd done, he wouldn't ask to return home immediately. He'd focus on rebuilding his own life first. Facing consequences instead of escaping them. Days passed, and life inside the house continued peacefully. Weekly dinners, laughter with friends, volunteering at the legal clinic. My calendar filled again. And slowly I realized something important. I wasn't lonely anymore. The fear of being alone, the fear my son once used against me, no longer controlled me. I had built a life beyond family conflict. A real, supportive community, and that clarity made my next decision easier. A week later, another letter arrived, shorter this time, just asking if we could at least talk. No demands, no requests, just conversation. I sat in my living room that evening, holding the letter, feeling the weight of years between us. And finally, I admitted something to myself. I wasn't ready, not yet. Forgiveness takes time, and forcing reconciliation too early only creates new resentment. So I chose silence, not permanent silence, just distance until emotions settled enough for honest conversation someday. Maybe months, maybe years, but healing can't be rushed. That night, sitting quietly with a cup of tea, I reflected on everything that had happened. Losing my wife, giving away the house, being pushed out, fighting back, winning, and rebuilding life afterward. The journey changed me, made me stronger but also more careful. Love without respect isn't healthy. Family without boundaries becomes exploitation. And sometimes, protecting yourself feels like cruelty to those who benefited from your kindness. But survival often looks selfish to people who never had to fight for dignity. Looking around my living room filled with warmth again, I realized something simple but powerful. This house was never just walls and roof. It was proof that standing up for yourself matters at any age. And as months passed peacefully, I began understanding that my story wasn't just about property disputes. It was about reclaiming respect. And now, as life finally settled, people often asked me the same question: did I regret fighting back? My answer surprised them every time. And the final lesson I learned from all this might surprise you too. People often ask me now, months after everything settled, whether I regret fighting my own son in court. Sometimes they ask gently, sometimes with quiet judgment, like they're expecting me to confess that winning cost too much. And honestly, I understand why they wonder. Society teaches us that parents should sacrifice endlessly, forgive instantly, and quietly accept whatever their children do. But real life is more complicated than that. I usually smile, take a slow breath, and tell them the truth. No, I don't regret it. What I regret is not seeing the signs earlier. What I regret is believing love alone guarantees respect. Because love without boundaries turns into permission for people to take advantage of you. And that lesson came late, but at least it came before it was too late. Life now looks very different from the chaos of last year. Mornings are peaceful again. I wake up, make coffee, and sit on the back porch watching sunlight touch the garden. Neighbors wave as they pass. Friends drop by without tension hanging in the air. The house feels alive again, not with conflict, but with calm. Sometimes laughter fills the rooms when Patricia or Harold or others from our group come over for dinner. Funny how strangers can become family when real family disappears. And maybe that's one of life's hidden truths: family isn't just blood, it's people who show up when things fall apart. A few weeks ago, I finished repainting the last room in the house. Standing there, brush in hand, I suddenly remembered the day my son helped me paint his childhood bedroom. He must have been 8 or 9, making a mess, laughing as paint accidentally splashed everywhere. For a second, I had to stop working because memories hit harder than expected. Being a parent means loving someone even when they hurt you. That never completely goes away. And despite everything, I still hope life teaches him what I couldn't: responsibility, gratitude, respect. Maybe one day we'll talk again properly, maybe not, but I've accepted that reconciliation only works when both sides truly change, not when one side simply runs out of options. Through mutual contacts, I hear occasional updates about him: job still unstable, life harder than before, Derek gone for good. Some nights sympathy creeps in and I wonder if I should reach out. But then I remember something important: helping someone doesn't mean rescuing them from consequences. Growth often comes from struggle, and if he ever rebuilds his life honestly, maybe then we'll meet again as father and son, not as victim and beneficiary. Until then, distance remains necessary, not out of hate, just wisdom. Meanwhile, my own life continues moving forward. Volunteering at the legal clinic became part of my weekly routine. Sitting beside other seniors fighting similar battles reminds me how common these situations are. Families fall apart quietly everywhere. Many parents are pushed aside once they become inconvenient. But more and more people are learning to protect themselves. And every time someone tells me my story gave them courage to stand up for their rights, it feels like something good came out of all that pain. Maybe that's how life balances things. I also made decisions about the future. Updated my will, organized my finances, made sure no confusion remains about ownership or rights ever again. Everything is clear now. No misunderstandings possible. Some people think that's harsh, but clarity prevents conflict. And at this stage of life, peace matters more than pleasing others. Harold once joked that I've become wiser through battle. Maybe he's right. Or maybe life simply teaches those who survive it long enough. Last week, while hosting dinner, someone asked the question that stuck with me: if you could go back, would you forgive him earlier and avoid all this? I thought carefully before answering. Because forgiveness without accountability would have meant losing not just the house, but my dignity. And dignity, once surrendered, is hard to recover. So no, I wouldn't change my decision. Painful as it was, standing up for myself saved more than property. It saved my self-respect, and if you've listened this far, maybe parts of this story felt familiar. Maybe you've faced betrayal, family conflict, or moments where choosing yourself felt wrong but necessary. If stories like this speak to you, make sure you subscribe and stay with us, because many people carry silent battles, and sometimes hearing someone else's journey reminds us we're not alone. Now, when I sit quietly in the evening, looking around the home that almost slipped away, I don't feel anger anymore. Just understanding, life isn't about winning or losing arguments. It's about learning when to stand firm and when to let go. My son made choices, I made mine, and consequences followed both of us. Some people say I chose property over family, but they misunderstand. I chose dignity over disrespect, respect over convenience, and peace over fear. So let me leave you with the same question I often ask myself now. If the people you love treated you like you didn't matter anymore, would you quietly step aside, or would you fight to remind them that you do? Because sometimes the hardest battles we fight aren't against strangers but for ourselves. And trust me, you're never too old to stand up for what's yours.